The crystal chandelier sparkled above, casting a warm glow over the opulent dining room. I, Sebastian Montague, sat at the head of the table, a king presiding over his court of culinary delights. The scene before me was a testament to my life's passion, or perhaps my life's curse. "Another glass, Mr. Montague," the waiter asked, hovering nearby with a bottle of Dom Perignon. "But of course, my good man," I replied, my words slightly slurred. "We mustn't let such exquisite champagne go to waste, now should we?" As he filled my flute for what must have been the 10th time that evening, I caught my reflection in the polished silver serving tray. My once chiseled jawline had long since disappeared, buried beneath layers of indulgence. My tailored suit, despite its expert cut, strained against my expansive form. Yet, I felt no shame. This was who I was, a connoisseur, a gourmand, a bon vivant. The term bon vivant always amused me. It painted a picture of sophistication and joie de vivre. But in truth, I was a slave to my appetite, chained to the endless pursuit of the next culinary high. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, raising my glass, "let us proceed to the 5th course." A chorus of approval rose from my guests, their faces flushed with wine and anticipation. This was my element, hosting extravagant dinners where each dish was more decadent than the last, where the wine flowed like water, and where gluttony reigned supreme. The server placed a plate before me with a flourish. "Foie gras tranche with black truffle and fig compote, sir." I inhaled deeply, savoring the rich aroma. "Magnificent," I murmured, already salivating. Without hesitation, I dove in, each bite a symphony of flavors exploding on my palate. "Sebastian, darling," cooed Vivian, my current paramour, from my right, "how do you always manage to outdo yourself?" I winked at her, swallowing a mouthful of the buttery foie gras. "My dear, when one's life revolves around the pursuit of pleasure, one must continually raise the bar." And indeed, my life did revolve around pleasure, specifically, the pleasure of food. I didn't eat to live, I lived to eat. My body was a temple dedicated to gluttony, each extra pound an offering to my insatiable appetite. As the night wore on, dish after sumptuous dish arrived. Butter-poached lobster gave way to Wagyu beef so marbled it nearly melted on the fork. A parade of cheeses preceded a series of desserts that would make a pastry chef weep with envy. By the time we reached the 12th and final course, a gold leaf-covered chocolate soufflé, I was in a state of near delirium. My stomach strained against my waistband, and my breaths came in short, labored gasps. But still, I persevered. "Come now," I cajoled my guests, many of whom had long since given up. "Surely you can manage one more bite." I scooped up a heaping spoonful of the soufflé, relishing the way it collapsed under its own weight. As I brought it to my lips, I caught Vivian's concerned gaze. "Sebastian," she said softly, "don't you think you've had enough?" I laughed, the sound booming across the table. "My dear, there's no such thing as enough in my world. Life is meant to be savored, to be consumed with gusto." With that, I shoved the spoon into my mouth, closing my eyes in ecstasy as the rich chocolate coated my tongue. It was at that moment, at the very peak of my decadence, that I felt the first twinge. At first, I dismissed it as mere indigestion, an occupational hazard in my line of indulgence. But then the pain exploded in my chest, as if someone had plunged a giant fork directly into my heart. My eyes flew open, meeting Vivian's horrified gaze. I tried to speak, to reassure her, but no words came. The room began to spin, the chandelier's light fracturing into 1,000 points of brightness. I was vaguely aware of my body toppling sideways, taking the table with me in a cacophony of shattering crystal and clattering silverware. The cold marble floor pressed against my cheek, a stark contrast to the fire raging in my chest. As I lay there, gasping like a beached whale, I could hear the panicked screams of my guests, the frantic calls for an ambulance. But they seemed distant, as if coming from the end of a long tunnel. My vision began to darken at the edges, the world closing in. In my last moments of consciousness, my gaze fell upon a puddle of spilled red wine next to my face. In its reflection, I saw myself, my bloated face contorted in pain, eyes wide with terror, mouth still full of that final damning bite of chocolate soufflé. As the darkness claimed me, a single thought echoed through my fading mind. Was this to be my legacy? A life consumed by consumption, ended in a spectacle of excess? And then, everything went black. The darkness that had enveloped me suddenly lifted, only to reveal a nightmare beyond my wildest imagination. I found myself in a place that could only be described as the twisted fever dream of a deranged chef's hell. The air hung thick and oppressive, laden with the putrid stench of burnt fat and rotting meat. It assaulted my nostrils, causing me to gag and retch uncontrollably. As my eyes adjusted to the dim, sickly light, I became aware of the horrifying landscape surrounding me. Rivers of rancid sauce flowed sluggishly across the ground, their surfaces bubbling with writhing maggots and squirming larvae. The very earth beneath my feet seemed to pulse and undulate, as if the entire realm was one massive, diseased organism. Where am I? I gasped, my voice barely above a whisper. As if in response to my question, a thunderous rumble shook the ground. I turned, and that's when I saw it, a colossal monstrosity that defied all logic and sanity. It was a behemoth crafted entirely from putrefied food, a grotesque parody of all the excesses I had indulged in during my life. Its body was a mountain of decomposing flesh, layer upon layer of yellowish fat oozing and sliding over each other. What passed for skin was a patchwork of moldy bread and rotting vegetables, pulsating with unseen parasites. But most horrifying of all were the countless mouths that opened and closed all over its massive form. Each maw was a nightmarish orifice, vomiting and swallowing in an eternal cycle of consumption and purge. I stood frozen in terror as the demon's largest mouth, a cavernous pit at the center of what might have been its face, opened wide. When it spoke, its voice was a nauseating chorus of belches and flatulence that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Welcome to the final feast," the gluttony demon roared, causing waves of fetid air to wash over me. "You who live to eat, shall now be the main course." Panic seized me, and I turned to flee. But as I tried to run, my feet sank into a swamp of putrid remains. The more I struggled, the deeper I sank, as if the very ground was trying to consume me. "No. Please." I cried out, my arms flailing wildly as I fought against the clinging muck. "This can't be happening." The demon's laughter, a horrific sound like 1,000 stomachs churning, echoed around me. "Oh, but it is happening, Sebastian Montague. Your life of excess has led you here, to me." As the monstrosity lumbered closer, I saw reflections in each of its multitude of mouths. But these were no ordinary reflections. They were grotesque visions of my life, played back in vivid, nauseating detail. In one mouth, I saw myself gorging at a lavish banquet while emaciated beggars pressed their faces against the restaurant's windows, their hollow eyes pleading for even a morsel. In another, I witnessed mountains of food I had carelessly tossed away, enough to feed entire villages for months. A third showed my body's slow deterioration, my arteries clogging, my liver swelling, my heart straining under the weight of my excesses. No, please," I whimpered, unable to tear my eyes away from these damning visions. "I didn't know. I didn't mean." "Ignorance is no excuse," the demon growled. "Every bite you took in gluttony, every morsel you wasted in arrogance, every hungry soul you ignored in your self-indulgence, it all led you here." Before I could respond, the creature's massive, greasy hands shot out and seized me. I felt my feet leave the ground as I was hoisted up, brought face to face with the demon's largest maw. The stench of bile and putrefaction engulfed me, so strong I could almost taste it. Rotting teeth the size of tombstones lined the cavernous mouth, and a tongue like a bloated, maggot-ridden carpet writhed within. I could see half-digested remnants of what might have once been human stuck between those teeth, and I realized with horror that I was about to join them. "Wait!" I screamed, my voice shrill with terror. "Please, give me another chance. I'll change, I swear it." The demon paused, its countless eyes glossy orbs of congealed fat, fixed upon me. "Change," it mused, its voice rumbling through its gelatinous body. "And what would you change, little glutton?" In that moment, faced with the literal jaws of hell, I felt a clarity I had never known in life. "Everything," I whispered. "I've wasted so much, food, resources, my own health. I've ignored the suffering of others in pursuit of my own pleasure. If I could go back, I'd use my wealth and influence to feed the hungry, to reduce waste, to promote sustainable eating." The demon seemed to consider this, its many mouths mumbling and churning. "Pretty words," it finally growled. "But words are wind, especially from one who has broken so many promises to himself already." It began to lift me higher, towards its gaping maw. I could feel the heat of its fetid breath, see the darkness of its throat, a void that promised eternal torment. "No," I shouted, struggling against its grip. "I mean it. Please, I'll do anything. Give me a chance to prove it." Just as I felt the brush of its rotting teeth against my skin, everything froze. The demon's mouth stopped just short of engulfing me, and an eerie silence fell over the nightmarish realm. A voice, different from the demons, softer, yet somehow more powerful, spoke from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Very well, Sebastian Montague. You shall have your chance. But be warned, this is not a gift, but a test. Fail, and your fate will be far worse than what you face today." Before I could respond, the world began to dissolve around me. The demon's grip loosened, and I felt myself falling through darkness and light, through fire and ice. As consciousness slipped away from me once more, I clung to a single thought, a desperate, fervent promise to change, to make amends, to transform my life of excess into one of purpose and compassion. And then, once again, everything faded to black. Just as the demon's putrid teeth were about to tear into my flesh, a blinding light erupted around us, so intense that it seemed to pierce through the very fabric of this nightmarish realm. The sudden radiance was accompanied by a sound, a high, clear note that cut through the fetid air like a blade of pure energy. The gluttony demon recoiled, its countless mouths opening in a cacophony of agonized screams. Its bloated, rotten flesh began to sizzle and melt, like butter in a scalding hot pan. Greasy rivulets of liquefied fat cascaded down its massive form, carrying with them chunks of decomposing food and writhing parasites. "No," the demon howled, its voice a symphony of gurgling and hissing as its body continued to dissolve. "This one is mine. His life of excess damns him." As the monstrous entity thrashed in its death throes, I felt myself being released from its grasp. I fell, expecting to plummet into the swamp of putrefaction below. Instead, I found myself suspended in mid-air, held aloft by some unseen force. That's when I saw it, or rather, felt it. A luminous figure materialized before me, its presence so intense that I felt as if my very soul was being seared. It was neither male nor female, neither young nor old. It simply was, a being of pure light and energy that defied all earthly description. When it spoke, its voice resonated not just in my ears, but in every cell of my body, every fiber of my being. It was a voice of infinite compassion, yet also of unyielding judgment. "Sebastian Montague," the entity intoned, its words vibrating through me like a cosmic tuning fork. "You stand at the precipice of your fate. Your life of gluttony and waste has brought you here, to the brink of damnation. But even now, at this final hour, you are granted a chance for redemption." I tried to speak, to plead my case, but found myself utterly incapable of forming words. The being continued, its message searing itself into my consciousness. "Know this, each bite of excess is a bite from the flesh of the starving. Each act of waste, a wound upon creation itself." As these words echoed through me, my mind was suddenly flooded with terrifying visions. I saw children with distended bellies, their eyes hollow with malnutrition, reaching out with skeletal hands for even a morsel of food. I witnessed elderly individuals rummaging through garbage heaps, fighting with stray dogs for discarded scraps. Vast swathes of once fertile land lay barren and lifeless, devastated by predatory agriculture practices. Each image was more harrowing than the last, and with each one, I felt a crushing weight descend upon me. It was as if I could feel the consequences of every excessive meal, every unnecessary indulgence. The pain was unbearable, a gnawing emptiness that seemed to devour me from within. I saw myself as I truly was, not the sophisticated bon vivant I had pretended to be, but a grotesque parasite, consuming far beyond my needs while others withered and starved. Every lavish dinner party, every carelessly discarded leftover, every self-indulgent feast played before my eyes in excruciating detail. "Please," I managed to gasp, my voice a broken whisper. "I understand now. I see the harm I've caused. What can I do to make amends?" The luminous being regarded me with what felt like both infinite compassion and unflinching scrutiny. "The path of redemption is never easy, Sebastian. It requires not just remorse, but action. Not just words, but deeds." More visions flashed before me, but these were different. I saw myself using my wealth and influence to fund food banks and nutrition programs. I witnessed my lavish dining room transformed into a soup kitchen, serving nourishing meals to those in need. I watched as I lobbied for sustainable agriculture practices and campaigned against food waste. "This," the entity continued, "is the potential that lies within you. The power to transform your life of excess into one of service and compassion. But be warned, the choice must be yours, and the road will not be easy." The being's light seemed to intensify, becoming almost painful to behold. "Choose wisely," it intoned, its voice reverberating through the very core of my being. "For your next feast may well be your final judgment." As these words echoed around me, I felt a sudden violent lurch. The world of light and terror began to fade, replaced by a cacophony of beeping machines and urgent voices. I was dimly aware of a mask being placed over my face, of hands pressing against my chest in a steady rhythm. "We're losing him," a distant voice shouted. "Charge to 300. A jolt of electricity surged through my body, and with it came a moment of perfect clarity. In that instant, suspended between life and death, I made my choice. No longer would I live solely for my own pleasure. If I survived this, I would dedicate my life to fighting the very excess that had nearly damned me. As consciousness began to slip away once more, I clung to this resolution with every ounce of my being. The luminous entity's final words echoed in my mind. "Choose wisely, for your next feast may well be your final judgment." With that thought, I surrendered to the darkness, unsure if I would ever awaken, but certain that if I did, it would be to a life utterly transformed. The harsh fluorescent lights assaulted my eyes as I clawed my way back to consciousness. The sterile smell of disinfectant mingled with the metallic tang of blood in my nostrils, a stark contrast to the putrid stench that had filled my senses moments ago. Or was it an eternity? Time had lost all meaning. As my vision slowly focused, I became aware of my surroundings. I was in an intensive care unit, my bloated body a tangle of tubes and wires. The steady beep of heart monitors and the hiss of oxygen created a discordant symphony around me. I tried to move, but my limbs felt leaden, unresponsive. "He's awake," a voice called out, followed by a flurry of activity around my bed. A doctor leaned over me, her face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Montague, can you hear me? You're in the hospital. You've had a severe heart attack." I tried to speak, to tell her about the hellish realm I had visited, about the demon of gluttony and the radiant being of judgment. But my throat was raw from the intubation, and all that came out was a hoarse croak. The bitter taste of bile lingered in my mouth, a reminder of the nightmarish feast I had narrowly escaped. "Don't try to talk yet," the doctor advised, checking my vitals. "You've been through a lot. Just rest for now." But rest was the last thing on my mind. As the days passed and I regained my strength, I became increasingly desperate to share my experience. I told the nurses about the rivers of rancid sauce, described to the doctors the demon's countless mouths of decay. I pleaded with them to understand the profound change I had undergone. I saw it all, I insisted to a young intern who was changing my the consequences of my gluttony, the suffering I've caused. I can't go back to how I was before. The intern patted my hand sympathetically. "It's common for patients who've had near-death experiences to have vivid hallucinations, Mr. Montague. Your brain was deprived of oxygen for several minutes. What you're describing, it's just your mind trying to make sense of the trauma." But I knew it was more than that. The visions, the sensations, the overwhelming guilt and revelation, they were too real, too transformative to be mere hallucinations. When my family finally came to visit, their relief at my survival was palpable. Vivian, my once constant companion in gastronomic excess, approached my bedside with tears in her eyes. "Oh, Sebastian," she whispered, taking my hand. "We were so worried. The doctors, they said we almost lost you." I squeezed her hand weakly. "Vivian, I need to tell you something. I've changed. What I experienced while I was unconscious." But as I began to recount my journey, I saw the concern in her eyes morph into confusion, then disbelief. "My brother, always the pragmatist, interrupted. Seb, you've been through a traumatic event. It's natural to feel different. But talking about demons and mystical beings? You need to focus on your recovery, not these fantasies." Their reactions only grew more bewildered as the days passed and my behavior changed dramatically. When the hospital nutritionist brought in my first solid meal, a carefully balanced, heart-healthy plate, I broke down in tears. "I can't," I sobbed, pushing the tray away. "Don't you understand? Every bite is stealing from the hungry. Every morsel wasted is a crime against creation." My family exchanged worried glances. They couldn't comprehend how I, once a proud glutton who would scoff at the mere mention of portion control, now trembled at the sight of a simple meal. As I recovered physically, I withdrew emotionally. The nightmares that plagued me every night made sleep a terrifying prospect. In my dreams, I was back in that hellish realm, assaulted by the stench of rotting meat and the screams of the demon. I would wake drenched in sweat, the phantom taste of putrefaction lingering on my tongue. Even after I was discharged from the hospital, I found myself unable to resume my normal life. My sprawling mansion, once the site of legendary feasts and bacchanalian excess, now felt like a mausoleum to my past sins. The gleaming professional kitchen stood unused, its state-of-the-art appliances gathering dust. "Sebastian, you need to eat," Vivian pleaded one evening, setting a small plate of grilled chicken and vegetables before me. "You're wasting away." I stared at the food, my stomach churning with anxiety. In my mind's eye, I saw the faces of starving children, their accusing gazes boring into me. "I can't," I whispered, pushing the plate away. "Don't you see? Every meal is a battle now. Every forkful a reminder of the horror I witnessed." Vivian threw up her hands in exasperation. "This is insane, Sebastian. You need help. Professional help. This isn't normal." But how could I make them understand? How could I explain the profound transformation I had undergone? The weight of my past excesses, the responsibility I now felt to make amends, it was a burden I bore alone. In the weeks that followed, I became a shadow of my former self. My once rotund frame grew gaunt, my designer suits hanging loosely on my diminished form. I avoided social gatherings, unable to face the lavish spreads that had once been the center of my world. Instead, I spent my days researching global hunger, sustainable agriculture, and food waste reduction. I made anonymous donations to food banks and nutrition programs, feeling a small measure of relief with each contribution. But it never felt like enough. The memory of the luminous being's words haunted me. "Choose wisely, for your next feast may well be your final judgment." As I stood at the window of my study, gazing out at the manicured gardens that suddenly seemed so frivolous, I realized that my journey was far from over. The near-death experience had shown me the consequences of my actions, but it was up to me to truly change my life. The real challenge lay ahead, to transform my existence from one of selfish indulgence to one of meaningful impact. With a deep breath, I turned away from the window, a new resolve settling over me. It was time to face my fears, to confront the demons, both literal and metaphorical, that I had encountered. Only then could I hope to find redemption and purpose in the second chance at life I had been granted. The sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon as I stood at the entrance of the local food bank, my hands trembling slightly as I reached for the door handle. It had been 6 months since my near-death experience, and each day still felt like a battle against the demons of my past. But today marked a new chapter in my journey of redemption. As I pushed open the door, the familiar scent of fresh bread and vegetables washed over me. Once, this aroma would have sent me into a frenzy of gluttonous anticipation. Now, it served as a poignant reminder of my purpose. "Good morning, Mr. Montague," greeted Maria, the food bank's coordinator. "Ready for another day?" I nodded, offering a small smile. "As ready as I'll ever be, Maria. And please, it's just Sebastian now." My decision to radically transform my life had shocked many, but none more than myself. In the weeks following my release from the hospital, I had liquidated my assets, selling off my mansion, my fleet of luxury cars, and my extensive collection of rare wines and gourmet delicacies. The proceeds, along with the bulk of my fortune, were donated to organizations combating hunger and food insecurity. It hadn't been easy. My family thought I had lost my mind, and my old friends from the culinary world had all but abandoned me. But with each check I wrote, with each possession I relinquished, I felt a little lighter, a little closer to atoning for my past excesses. Now, instead of hosting lavish dinner parties, I spent my days distributing meals to those in need. My hands, once used to wielding golden cutlery, now packed boxes of canned goods and fresh produce. It was hard work, often thankless, but it filled a void in me that no amount of gourmet food ever could. As I worked alongside the other volunteers, I couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought me here. The memory of that hellish realm, with its rivers of rancid sauce and the monstrous demon of gluttony, still haunted my dreams. But now, instead of paralyzing me with fear, it fueled my determination to make a difference. "Sebastian," called out Mark, another volunteer. "We've got a new batch of donations coming in. Can you help sort them?" I nodded, making my way to the loading dock. As I began to sift through the boxes of donated food, my mind wandered to the campaign I had recently launched against food waste. My past connections in the food industry, once used to secure reservations at exclusive restaurants, were now being leveraged to expose abusive practices and promote sustainable consumption. Just last week, I had spoken at a local university, sharing my harrowing story as a cautionary tale against the dangers of gluttony. The memory of standing before those young, impressionable faces brought a mix of emotions. I stood where you stand now, I had told them, my voice quavering slightly. A man who thought the world was his all-you-can-eat buffet. But let me tell you, the bill for such indulgence comes due, and the price. The price is terrifying. I had seen the skepticism in some of their eyes, the same disbelief I had encountered from doctors and family members. But I also saw understanding dawning on others, a realization of the broader consequences of our consumption habits. As I continued sorting through the donations, my stomach growled softly. Even now, years after my experience, every meal remained an act of conscious choice. Each bite was accompanied by a silent prayer, a reminder of the fine line between nourishment and excess. The scent of food still sometimes made me tremble, triggering vivid flashbacks of that nightmarish realm. But I had learned to channel that fear into action, to use it as a constant reminder of why I had chosen this path. Sebastian, Maria's voice pulled me from my reverie. There's someone here to see you. I turned to find Vivian standing awkwardly by the entrance, looking out of place in her designer outfit amidst the utilitarian surroundings of the food bank. It had been months since I'd last seen her. Vivian, I said, surprised. What are you doing here? She fidgeted with her purse strap, her eyes taking in my much-changed appearance. I wanted to see how you were doing. You look different. I couldn't help but chuckle. Different is one way to put it. I feel different, Vivian. For the first time in my life, I feel purposeful. We talked for a while, and I could see the struggle in her eyes, the attempt to reconcile the man I had been with the one standing before her now. As she left, she paused at the door. You know, Sebastian, she said softly, I think I'm beginning to understand. What you experienced, it really did change you, didn't it? I nodded, feeling a wave of emotion wash over me. It did. And while I wouldn't wish that terror on anyone, I'm grateful for the perspective it gave me. As I watched her leave, I realized that my journey was far from over. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities to make a difference. The vision of that gastronomic hell never fully abandoned me, but now it served as a constant reminder of the path I had chosen. I had learned the hard way that the true flavor of life isn't found in unbridled indulgence, but in balance and compassion. And though the smell of food might still sometimes make me tremble, I found peace in knowing that each day was a new opportunity to nourish not just bodies, but souls, including my own, still on the road to recovery. As I turned back to my work, a sense of calm settled over me. The demons of my past would always be there, lurking in the shadows of my mind. But with each meal packed, each hungry person fed, I was building a fortress of good deeds to keep them at bay. And in that moment, I knew with certainty that I had made the right choice. This was my feast now, a banquet of compassion, served one helping at a time. Thank you for listening to this tale of transformation and redemption. If you found Sebastian's journey as compelling as I did, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking stories like this one. Hit that like button if this near-death experience narrative resonated with you, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had a life-changing experience that altered your perspective so dramatically? We'd love to hear your stories. And if this tale made you reflect on your own relationship with food and consumption, consider sharing it with others who might benefit from its message. Remember, every small act of kindness and consciousness can create ripples of change. So let's spread this story and inspire others to find their own path to purpose and compassion. Until next time, stay mindful, stay kind, and keep feeding your soul with stories that matter.